Hi, everyone. Hello. Can you all hear me? Perfect. I think we're going to go ahead and start, so if everyone wants to find a seat, and we will kick off.
Yes. And a request of seating. We are having a wonderful response tonight, so if you have some spare seats on the interior of the seats, if you don't mind just sort of compressing inwards and making it a little easier for folks that are joining us later to grab a seat on the edge, we sure would appreciate that. Thank you. We may also have some Holy Communion staff that can assist with some extra chairs if we need those, but there are some seats here on the side as well. So, dear friends, on behalf of the Episcopal Parish of Church of the Holy Communion and our rector, Father Sandy Webb, we are so pleased to welcome you here. Please be at peace. Please be comfortable. We're also glad to welcome all of those joining us online. My name is Jonathan. I'm the senior associate rector here at the church, and after being connected to Voices for a Safer Tennessee through one of our council members, it has been my honor to help arrange for our community to host this panel discussion. At Holy Communion, we especially value the virtue of hospitality. And on that note, please make yourselves comfortable. If you have any needs, let us know. There's water at the back table. And if you haven't heard, the boil notice has been lifted. So the water is both... Thank you, MLGW. The water is both flowing and safe to us again. And more importantly, the restrooms are functional. Those can be found exiting that rear door if you take a left and then another quick left if you need them. But as I was saying, we value hospitality very much here, and especially amidst increasing polarization, we value hospitality that both honors diversity and focuses on what unifies us. For instance, members of our parish encompass a wide spectrum of viewpoints and worldviews, and yet come together in prayer and worship as a part of the body of Christ in order to love God and to seek to love and serve our neighbor. And so we host this event tonight in hopes that it will contribute to the uniting of people of goodwill, whatever one's background, whatever one's politics, to working together towards those goals which should unite us. Things like keeping our children and communities safe. Things like reducing unnecessary harm and violence through both grassroots efforts and the work of those in governance. And we are very grateful for all of those who put together this panel tonight and for all of those who seek to serve and protect our communities. In the Anglican tradition, as in others, we begin prayer by saying, "The Lord be with you," and the people respond, "And also with you." So, the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Lord Jesus Christ, as you went about all the cities and villages teaching and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, you saw the crowds and you had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. You said, "I am the good shepherd. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. But I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice." Lord, continue to guide and call us to your fold. Have compassion on us, harried and feeling helpless at the violence and sin and death that grip our communities, that grip our world, and help us live in your example of fearless love, trust in God, and setting about the work God has given us to do, that in your example and footsteps we too might be not merely hired hands, but shepherds of our communities and world. Be among us tonight as we discuss the challenging problem of gun violence, and give us ears to hear one another's wisdom, hearts to love, and hands to serve. That we would go forth in hope as responsible citizens both of your country, of our country and your kingdom, and do all that we can for the care and keeping of your little ones. Speak now in our hearts as we take a moment of silence for all of those who have lost their lives due to gun violence and their families still grieving this loss. I ask all these things through the mercy and abiding love of Almighty God. Amen. I would now like to welcome forward Katie, a board member for Voices for a Safer Tennessee, who will tell you a little bit more about their organization and the panel that they've organized for tonight. Thank you for being here.
Good evening, everyone. As Reverend Chesney said, I'm Katie Marchetti. I am one of the founding members of Voices for Safer Tennessee and also a board member. As many of the founding members that you'll see in the audience today, this was never supposed to be my day job or what I was spending as much time on, but as many in this community see, we have no choice. So this is what I am here to do, is give you a bit of the origin story as to how we came about, and then I'll turn it over to our very esteemed panel. And I also want to say thank you to everyone for being here. And I know that for some of you, this is a comfortable spot to be. For others of you, it is not. And know that you are all welcome and you are fulfilling what we have put forward as our mission, to create a safe space to engage in this conversation. So a little bit of background on Voices for Safer Tennessee. This group came together after the Covenant shooting in Nashville. I think that we had experienced gun violence at different levels, directly, indirectly, but we were a lot of angry moms, to be honest, that felt heartbroken. And instead of trying to find another place on the wall to bang our heads against, we said, what if we give it one sprint? What if we give it a sprint until the end of the legislature? And we reached out to everyone that we knew that had any sort of passion for this topic. And what we found was a resounding welcome. People saying, yes, please, what do we do? How do we help? We were Republicans, we were Democrats, we were independent, we were gun owners, we were people who would never have guns in their house, and everything in between. And we said, what if we try a different tack? What if we really, truly employ a bipartisan strategy here? And we agree on tenets that we can all set our minds to, agree to, and we might not agree to anything else that, creeps into the political conversation, but these three tenets. But this is the way we're going to move the ball forward. That was in, March of last year. Fast forward 9 months, 10 months, whatever we are now. We have a coalition of close to 30,000 people across the state of Tennessee. We cover all 95 counties. We have raised a budget that supports a 501c4 tenet of our organization, which is focused on advocacy, and you'll hear a lot more from Erin Rogus about that, our policy director. We also have a 501c3 tenet, which covers primarily education and awareness. We are doing panels like this across the state to create, again, space for conversation. Memphis does not need to be told about the fact that gun violence is an issue. I think everyone in this room has been impacted by gun violence in some way. We are not here to tell you about what an issue this is. You are well aware. What we are here to do is to give you hope that we are trying to bring change across the state, in Davidson County, and Maury County, and Knox County, and Shelby, you name it. And I know I just said Maury and not Murray, sorry. But here we are. I'm a native Nashvilleian too. In any event, so the way that we are going to facilitate that conversation, we're going to have our panel, and throughout the panel discussion as well, we are going to be passing out note cards. I want this to feel like a true conversation and dialogue. So members of Voices for Safer Tennessee will be passing out note cards. As you think of questions, feel free to jot them down, and then we will bubble them up to the panel for responses from our panelists. Another note, if you want more information about Voices for Safer Tennessee, our website is safertn.org. We've got yard signs in the back, one-pagers. We have a lot of ways for you to get involved at your comfort level. If that's, chatting with a friend about this topic that you've, never spoken to before, we are utterly grateful. If it's, a bigger ask in the form of throwing a house party to invite people to write notes to your legislators, do that as well. And I think a lot of folks have been moved into advocacy that haven't been in it before, and you're, again, different comfort levels. We're here to help you and meet you wherever you are. So without further ado, thank you again to everyone that is here, and I'm going to turn over to Eric Barnes of the Daily Memphian, whom I think some of you might know already. Over to you, Eric.
I have this mic and it's remote, and I live in fear that I will forget to turn it off. Fear. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Katie, and all the folks from Voices for asking me to do this, and I really do appreciate being here and with this great panel. Again, I'm Eric Barnes. I'm CEO, executive editor of the Daily Memphian, host of Behind the Headlines over on WKNO. And first off, I will let the panel, I'll introduce the panel real quickly. I'll do a poor job of it. Bill Gibbons is head of the Memphis Shelby County Crime Commission, director of the Public Safety Institute at U of M, also former Shelby County DA and former head of Tennessee Department of Safety and Homeland Security. Beverly Robertson, most recently former president of the Greater Memphis Chamber and also former head of the National Civil Rights Museum. And Erin Rogus is policy director for Voices for a Safer Tennessee. I'll let them introduce themselves a bit more and why and how they came here. Again, the questions, and for people standing, there are a few more seats over there, so if you want to come around as people keep coming in. Some stats, some statistics that are, I think, probably if you came to this panel, this forum, you're probably fairly familiar with these, but stats from the whole country, from Tennessee, and of course from Memphis. The majority, 84% of U.S. adults say they have taken at least one precaution to protect themselves or their families against the possibility of gun violence. Almost 60% have talked to their children or other family members about gun safety. 40% have attended a gun safety class or practiced shooting a gun. And about 1 in 3 Americans own a gun. That was based on a Gallup poll in 2022. According to CDC data, firearms are now the leading cause of death for U.S. children and teens age 1 through 19. In 2020, deaths from firearms surpassed motor vehicle accidents and other injuries. We don't know exactly how many gun owners there are in Tennessee, in part because we don't require permits, but based on the data that's available in polls and sort of assimilating that, about half of Tennesseans own at least one firearm. Last bit of stats before we go to the people. In last spring, April, May, something like that, kind of in the lead up to the city council race and the mayor's race, Daily Memphian commissioned a third-party poll that was representative of the whole of Memphis and Shelby County about crime and public safety. We also asked in that question about guns, and did folks want what is maybe even flippantly but commonly referred to as common sense gun laws, such as waiting periods and assault rifle restrictions, or did they want even more dramatic change? Okay, and in Memphis, 40% wanted those, at least the common sense changes. Another 46% wanted dramatic changes to the gun law. So 86% of Memphians across age, across neighborhoods, income, gender, everything, were 86%. We also surveyed Shelby County, and we separated out the data the polling firm did. So just for outside Shelby County, the numbers were dramatically different. 36% wanted the common sense, at least common sense changes. Another 38% wanted dramatic changes. So 75% of folks outside Shelby County. And again, I want to say that those were across. There wasn't some concentration. It was remarkably similar. And Bev and her husband, Howard, in their marketing firm, did a bunch of focus groups for us that we published I'm not turning this into a Daily Memphian thing, I promise, towards the end of the summer, and found similar things across race, neighborhood, gender, everything. It really common views, not on everything about criminal justice and public safety, but I think around guns, there was really widespread common opinions. So with that, let me, and we're passing the mic here, Bill's got the mic, let me start with you, and just, you can talk a little bit more about your bio, but both as a job, but as somebody who's lived in Memphis your whole life. I don't know. For a long time, you've been in public service for a long time. Why are you here? Why is this important to you on both a professional and personal level?
Well, first of all, I probably need to be a little careful what I say tonight, because looking around this audience, I know about half of you. And you're going to let me know what you think about what I say, I'm sure. Is this microphone working all right? Can you hear me in the back?
Is it on? Oh, yeah. Keep talking into it.
Is this better? Okay, good. Sorry about that. Well, why am I here tonight? Well, I'm here because I was asked to be here, but I have kind of lived up close to this whole issue of gun violence for a long time in my various official capacities. I served as district attorney for 14 years, And in that capacity, every year we saw thousands of perpetrators of gun crimes being prosecuted, as well as thousands of victims. And we don't need to diminish the importance of focusing on those victims. So I saw that up close for 14 years as DA. Then as Commissioner of Safety and Homeland Security, part of my responsibility was to oversee our mandatory handgun permit system. And when we came into office in 2011, frankly, that system was not the best in the world. The waiting period was pretty long, but we spent a lot of time putting additional resources into that system, making it, frankly, in my opinion, a model for the nation. We reduced the wait time, the turnaround time to get a handgun carry permit to about a week. And over 500,000 Tennesseans took advantage of that, going through the required background check, the required training in order to get that handgun permit. So frankly, I was pretty proud of what we had done. Then a number of things happened. First of all, in 2014, the General Assembly, in its wisdom or lack thereof, decided to enact legislation allowing handguns in vehicles without a permit. I was working for Governor Haslam at the time. We opposed that legislation, but it passed pretty overwhelmingly. And it did not take the criminal element very long to figure out that that meant more guns in vehicles. So before that legislation passed, in Memphis, we were averaging about 300 or so reported guns stolen from vehicles per year. This past year, we had over 2,000 guns reported stolen from vehicles in the city of Memphis. And every one of those guns ended up in the wrong hands, in the hands of individuals who were apt to do some bad things in our community. So that happened in 2014. In 2016, I was still working for Governor Haslam, working for the public, but with Governor Haslam. And in 2016, a lot of people forget this, the legislature was looking at passing legislation to eliminate our mandatory handgun carry permit. We opposed that, and we succeeded in defeating it in 2016. It was a pretty tense debate, but we defeated it. But then it came back in 2021, and the legislature passed legislation basically gutting our mandatory handgun carry permit. So now, without a background check, without any training, someone can carry a handgun either concealed or openly in Tennessee. And I testified against that legislation and went to Nashville. Our police director at the time, Mike Rollins, went up and testified against it. I don't think we changed a single vote. So that's where we are at this point. In terms of what I see as the impact, all you have to do is look at the stats. Prior to enactment of this legislation, less than 40% of all of our reported violent incidents in Memphis involved guns. Last year, it was over 70%. Prior to enactment of this legislation, about 30% of all domestic violence aggravated assaults involved guns. Last year, it was over 50%. So you can see the impact of simply making guns more accessible to those who don't need to be having guns, frankly. And we can get into that a little bit more later. So I've been up close in terms of seeing the impact of it, being involved in the legislative changes. I will say that some of the legislators who voted for loosening our gun laws are my friends, and I can still consider them my friends. We just agreed to have a different opinion on this. You can agree without being disagreeable, and I think that's important for all of us to remember as we try to have dialogue with people on this issue.
Let's go to Bev.
So I'm Beverly Robertson. I am the COO of Trust Marketing and Communications, although I've retired 2 or 3 times. Do not retire like me, that's for sure. But we have a business located in downtown Memphis, formerly president and CEO of the Greater Memphis Chamber, and before that, many years leading the National Civil Rights Museum. I will tell you one of the reasons I am here is I had the privilege of working with the Daily Memphian on the series of community conversations in 5 sectors of the city. And what I learned from that is we have far more in common than differences. I don't care if you're in Orange Mound or Binghamton or East Memphis, we want the same things. We want safety. We want the ability to go out without being victimized. We don't want our property broken into and stolen. So one of the reasons that I have always cared about these things is because I love my city. And there is nothing you can do about that. I love Memphis, and I'm willing to stand and fight for it. And so I have always been that kind of person. That is where I am now. I grew up here. I live here. I raised my children here. I was educated here. And I'm not going anywhere. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Erin Rogus, and I'm the Policy Director for Voices for a Safer Tennessee. I also wear a second hat as Policy Advisor for former Senator Bill Frist. I've been with him since 2015, and part of the reason I really even got involved in this work with Safer Tennessee is he joined our advisory board, really because he has seen the uptick in gun deaths as a public health crisis. And I have previously worked in Republican politics my entire career, in the U.S. Senate, in the House side, the Republican National Committee, and also actually worked for a Republican member, one of the few at the time, who really was outspoken on firearm safety issues. He came from a law enforcement background and really was seeing how police officers were being outgunned, and we were trying to get laws passed. I started working on this about in 2010, 2011, 2012. We had the Sandy Hook shooting happen, and we were there in Congress, and my boss and I thought, okay, we're finally going to get some progress on this legislation that we've been working on. We're finally going to get universal background checks through. We're finally going to get some of these other, pragmatic firearm reforms passed. And, there was a little bit of conversation, and then eventually crickets. And we were really shocked that we couldn't get, some bipartisan support for something substantive at that time. And as you all know, it's only escalated from there. We're seeing more and more mass shootings, community violence, accidental shootings. It's, suicides. You run the gamut when you look at the data. And that's my why for being here. I'm a mom of 3. I want my kids to grow up in a safer Tennessee. And I actually really do have hope that we are actually moving in that direction, which we're going to get to talk about a little bit more tonight. So thank you all for being here.
I'm going to stay with Let's stay with Erin. Sorry, I'm going to try to take this on. We'll pass that back to Erin. Just because I do think, my question involves statewide survey in Tennessee, 76% of voters across the state support temporary transfer laws that temporarily restrict access to guns for individuals who are at high risk of harming themselves or others. The question is, in part, why doesn't that get passed when 76% of people want it? But even more broadly, I do think there's a sense that we in Memphis think we're the only ones in the state who want this to change. The rest of the state is fine with the way it is. And you all, as Katie was saying, have been around the state, 90-something counties. Talk about the dynamics when 76% of people want what gets looped in or poorly defined as common sense, gun reforms around people at risk. Why doesn't it change?
Sure. And so to your point, 3 out of 4 Tennesseans do support these idea of temporary transfer laws, which basically means if someone is at risk of harming themselves or others, that we can intervene through a court-ordered process and temporarily remove their access to firearms, prevent them from purchasing more firearms. It's something that is broadly supported, as you said, by Tennesseans, but also by Republican primary voters. We have over 60% support when we polled just Republican primary voters. So it does have a broad amount of support. And the stat, when we're talking about data, the one that's really concerning to me is that as a parent, firearms are now the number one killer of our children here in Tennessee, the number one killer nationwide. And we actually, it became that number one nationally in 2020. In Tennessee, we met that metric 3 years earlier. So in 2017, we actually, child deaths surpassed, child deaths by firearms surpassed car accident deaths for the first time really in history. So to me, that's shocking. And so we're seeing these data both with support for change and also with escalating gun death. Why are we not seeing action? I'm going to disagree here and actually say I do think we are seeing some change. So I mentioned previously I worked on firearm safety. We saw nothing happen in Congress in 2010. We saw these escalating firearm incidents. Well, in 2022, there was the Uvalde school shooting, which I'm sure you all have probably heard of. And at that point, really, voters said they'd had enough. And we had members from both sides of the aisle at the federal level come together and pass in 2022 the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It's the most significant piece of firearm safety legislation we've seen pass in nearly 30 years. Did it solve all our problems? Certainly not. We're here today still having that conversation about what more needs to be done, but it's a first step. And we had a Republican leader from Texas as one of the champions of that legislation. So to me, that points to a shift. I think we're seeing that shift in Tennessee too. After the Covenant tragedy in March last year, we had our governor, Bill Lee, who I believe is probably the strongest Second Amendment governor we've had here in Tennessee, come to the table and say, okay, I'm going to pause. We need to do something different. He proposed an order of protection law. When that didn't pass in the state legislature, he said, I'm going to call you all back. We're going to have another dialogue about this. Let's talk about how we can improve public safety here. And we got some small incremental bills passed coming out of that session. Did we see everything we wanted? Certainly not. But that's why we have to keep coming back to the table and letting them know that we are grateful for them having this conversation. We're going to be showing up to the polls to vote about these issues. And, we're going to be here year after year. Because I think one thing that people forget, if you're not used to being involved in policy and advocacy, it is a multi-year process. People will mention, our lobbyists will tell us, wine and grocery stores took 7 years to pass. And you're like, wine and grocery stores, that's not even that controversial, is it? Right? So thinking about this is obviously a very polarizing issue. So we just have to be committed to coming back each year and making those incremental changes. And I think we can get some of these things like this temporary transfer law passed, but it's going to take some time.
Let's go to Beverly here. You mentioned the community conversations and the commonality of people wanting safety and wanting some of the same things. Talk about maybe impacts on various neighborhoods of gun violence, of crime involving guns. And also, we're talking about the legislature, they're in session. What would you've been up there lobbying before for the Civil Rights Museum, for the Chamber certainly, other things. What would you love to see come out of the legislature?
I will say that a couple of things were really eye-opening when we did the community conversations. One of the things that was really crystal clear across all groups was that there is little parenting being done. A lot of parents have absolved responsibility for instilling values and helping young people understand the standards of civility. Because if you look at what is going on, in many instances, there are parents who take their children to parking lots so that they can carjack cars. And there needs to be more accountability, and until we can institute greater accountability, there will be some issues that we will continue to have. There were some other things that came out that were really very interesting as well in some of the sessions. One of the sessions, and this was repeated in about 3 of them, they suggested that young people who are continuous perpetrators, repeat perpetrators of crime that go to juvenile court, should be referred to a boarding school where they can leave the environment in which they live, be in that environment, have a totally different curricula, but also add to the curricula workforce training so that when they finish, they get to the 12th grade and they graduate from boarding school, they actually have a company standing up and there's a job waiting for them. And that way you're not sending them back into the environment, because what happens now is when the police arrest them, and let me tell you, smash and grab instances across the city and retail establishments, reckless driving, donuts in the middle of the street, intercepting you at a light and taking your car, carjacking you, victimizing you in the street in broad daylight. A lot of those young people should be in school. They need to be in school. And so where are the controls around that as well? So we've got a lot in common as we look at what's going on. There were a couple of things in Chamber, and I want to talk a little bit about some things that I would hope happen as the Chamber sort of looks at where they want to go. But we do know the proliferation of guns is a problem in our community. The Chamber has a letter that a lot of businesses signed on to. And I'm going to only give you 4 things that I'm hopeful about. 1, they'd like to see legislation passed to make the possession of a stolen firearm a felony. Number 2, provide resources to help clear the violent crime backlog. We have a court system here that is very dysfunctional. 40 cases were heard last year versus 200 pre-pandemic. A juvenile court system where the police catch a perpetrator, there's nowhere to keep them. And a lot of people believe that's the job of the police. They don't control the juvenile court system. They don't control the court system. So we really need to understand the work of the police, because I think a lot of people get it twisted. Well, it's your fault that they're back on the streets. No, I can arrest them. And what I love is that we have a police chief that perp walked them on TV. I don't know if you guys saw this, but I saw it and I smiled, because there were 20 people that were caught as a result of smash and grabs, and every picture was on TV. Isn't that embarrassing? To the parents, to the young people as well. She perp walked them on TV. So I think more things like that need to happen. The other thing that the Chamber is requesting is pass legislation to permit civil forfeiture of vehicles involved in drag racing and reckless driving. Take the car. Take the car. And then Brent Taylor has done a great job. His voice is being heard loudly and clearly at the state level, and he has some bail reform measures on the table. So I think support of that is really great. But these are some things that I'd like to see happen at the state level to really impact some of this crime that we're having. There were other things that people said, but some of it includes taking benefits away from people whose kids are constantly committing crimes, in and out of jail constantly. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking right now.
Let's go to Bill. I'm going to jump around a little bit but that's fine. Y'all can handle it. You, I believe, through the Crime Commission, working with Brent Taylor on changes to how juvenile court works statewide and what's called blended sentencing. And you wrote an amazing 1,500-word essay for us some months ago about how the juvenile justice system works. I'm going to give you a minute to explain I mean, we're only 30 minutes behind based on our thing. I'm going to give you a minute, though, to talk about what blended sentencing and the challenge of the way the juvenile court system is set up right now.
That phrase means nothing to most people here. So
Yeah, I know.
right now, under our juvenile system, a juvenile cannot be supervised, whether it's in a secure facility or in the community, past that juvenile's 19th birthday. So let's take a 17-year-old carjacker, carjacking people at gunpoint, found guilty. He cannot be supervised beyond his 19th birthday. So regardless of whether you're for rehabilitation or accountability or both, and I'm for both, I would submit that that's just not enough time. So what Senator Taylor, Representative Gillespie, Representative White, and some others have been working with the Crime Commission on is to eliminate that arbitrary 19th birthday limit and allow jurisdiction beyond that 19th birthday so that we can have more rehabilitation, so that we can have more accountability. So that's a brief explanation of what so-called blended sentencing is.
And it's one of the few things in all the shows and articles we've done on public safety and the court system that, by and large, across a whole spectrum of points of view, agree that the way that whole 19-year cutoff is not working. And it gets into the whole issue of, do you treat someone as an adult or do you treat them as a juvenile? And what blended is this sense that you have some kind of middle ground that can involve more intervention for a longer period of time, more diversion, more whatever it is, right? And or if it's jail, the whole spectrum because of that cutoff. Let's talk about, I think that was important since we were talking about legislative things. Let's talk a bit about mental health. And I think I'm going to Erin on this first. Obviously, y'all were sadly and awfully, although born out of the horrible school shooting. And inevitably, nationally here, anywhere when there's a mass shooting, there's a certain amount of call for, well, this is a mental health problem, and this is a mental health. We need more mental health access. We need better mental health facility. I don't know that a whole lot of people disagree that there's a massive mental health issue involved with not just the mass shootings, but the children who are killing or nearly killing and doing the things that Beverly so powerfully described. But talk about mental health and its role in all this.
Sure. I really appreciate you bringing up this issue. And I think, research has really shown that only about 4% of community violence is attributable to severe mental illness. So it often gets put out there as, well, these are all mental health issues, and if we just had more mental health resources, it would be solved. And that's not necessarily the case, because certainly in the United States, we don't have a monopoly on mental health issues, right? We are not the only country that has mental health problems, but we do have, a disproportionate amount of firearms and firearm access compared to other countries. So, and what we also may not realize is that firearms, the number one cause of firearm death it's not homicide, it's not an accidental shooting, it's suicide. 54% of our gun deaths nationally are suicide, and here in Tennessee as well. And we're in the latest data shows, unfortunately, we are in the top 10 states nationwide for youth suicide by firearm. And Tennessee is on the top of a lot of lists for good reasons, and unfortunately, this is not a list we want to be up close to the top of. And so, temporary transfer, one of the reasons that we have 3 policy priorities, one of the reasons the temporary transfer law is one of them, is because it is a evidence-based way to reduce suicides. When you're able to intervene with someone who's in a mental health crisis, usually there are signs, family members see it, or law enforcement encounters it. If you're able to remove their access to firearms, you can save lives. If you look at studies in Connecticut and Indiana, which have had these laws on the books the longest, Connecticut's seen a 14% reduction in suicides. Indiana's seen nearly 8% reduction in suicides. So that is lives saved. That's helping them get that time and space to get the help they need. Because unfortunately, if you decide to commits, attempts suicide with a firearm, you have a 90% completion rate. You're probably going to die. But any other rate, any other type of suicide attempt, they only have about a 10% completion rate. So unfortunately, firearms, we are just seeing much greater death associated with when there is a mental health issue affiliated. And so that's part of the reason we're really kind of advocating for this policy issue. Safer Tennessee would certainly, certainly supports the idea of more mental health funding. I know the legislature has appropriated that, but we are really kind of narrowly focused on our three policy priority areas of expanded background checks, secure storage of firearms, and temporary transfer laws.
Did you want to say something, Bev, or? Okay, let's go to Bill. But you passed the mic down to Bill. I will also add that, again, in so many of the conversations that we've done on Behind the Headlines and in the Daily Memphian, one of the things that so many people bring up is childhood trauma. And the more and more data and the science of childhood trauma. It happens to be my very good friend, Richard Greenwald, who some of you all may know, who ran Soulsville and Stax and the charter school there, and has worked with at-risk youth since we were kids in college. And the data on childhood trauma is both horrifying and just saddening. And that the path that puts a child on to then enter the kind of crimes that we're talking about here and that we're seeing, we call it a random act of violence, and it is a random act of violence for so many victims, but for that child, the trauma started very, very young. And if you have ever been in the calls for mental health, I'm editorializing now, and then I'm going to shut up. As someone who's had a family member in childhood mental health facilities, many, many, many of them. I'm going to do it this way. Many of them, whether it is the most expensive facility in the country or the bottom of the barrel facility of the country, it's an imperfect solution and it's a sad and terrible place for a child to be, even with loving parents and even with loving step-parents and loving family members around them. And so it is an interesting thing to call for mental health as a fix to this. And I am all for better mental health for all of us. Everybody in the room, me too. But I think that there is the realities if you've ever tour youth villages or go to Lakeside or go to some of these facilities, they are stopgap measures for most of these kids. That's my editorial comment for the day. Let me go to Bill. There are obviously pro-gun organizations out there. You've heard from them, I'm sure, in your political career. And they've pushed back against any sort of proposed gun reform, and not a whole lot in the grand scheme of things has passed in Tennessee over the years. Address their concerns. It's a slippery slope. You start restricting guns, you're starting to infringe on Second Amendment rights. You're starting to take guns from legal, mentally healthy, perfectly stable gun owners, and in an environment where crime is up nationwide, right? There are people who feel like I need to go out and buy a gun because there are so many guns. So your response to the folks who are going to say that or hear that?
First of all, I want to respond to the childhood trauma thing, because I think it is important, especially in the city of Memphis. And Beverly knows this. I've spent a lot of time speaking at school assemblies in Memphis, mainly high school assemblies, middle school assemblies also, primarily in inner city Memphis. And I always start those assemblies by asking two questions. How many of you know someone who's gone to 201 Poplar? For those of you who are not from Memphis, 201 Poplar is our jail, okay? Virtually every hand goes up. And then I ask, how many of you know someone who's been killed as a result of gun violence? A majority of hands go up. So childhood trauma is a very, very serious challenge in our community. Now, to get to your question. I said earlier that some of these legislators who have voted to loosen our gun laws are my friends. I try to have civil dialogue with them. We've simply agreed to disagree on these things, but we can disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that's important. I think it's important for all of us to try to have those open channels of dialogue. For example, a friend of mine is a rural East Tennessee legislator, and he's helped us out on some things. When I say us, he's helped Memphis out on some things. But he was strongly in favor of eliminating our mandatory handgun permit system. And he and I had a lot of healthy debates about that. And, you know, from his standpoint, you know, he would say, Bill, it's all about freedom. Don't you understand? It's all about freedom. And it really got down to his view of what the Second Amendment said. Now, I didn't share his view of what the Second Amendment says, but, you know, but we would have those conversations. And I think it's important to have that kind of dialogue moving forward. Another rural legislator who I visited with just a few months ago, and we talked about the impact of permitless carry in a city such as Memphis or Nashville. And we talked about the fact that the impact here might be different than, say, in Wayne County. And he understood that, and he recognized that. He acknowledged that. And we talked about the need to try to come up with a way to address the fact that permitless carry has been devastating for a city such as Memphis. So having that kind of dialogue, I think we can kind of move them toward some solution to some of these problems. And as was said earlier, we need to view this as a multi-year effort. Don't be discouraged if we don't make all the progress you think we ought to make this year. We got to stick with it year after year, and we can make some progress on this. But part of that is really trying to sit down with some of these legislators and talk about the problems and try to come up with some solutions that we can live with from our point of view and that they can live with as well.
Last quick question. The pushback on change that there are already enough laws on the books, they're just not being enforced.
Well, there's some truth to that. That's a whole other issue in terms of laws not being enforced. But there are also some laws that need to be changed. Let me give an example. And this may pass this year. I mean, part of what we need to do is to try to rein in this loosening of access to guns and the proliferation of guns, but also part of the solution is to hold those individuals accountable who commit crimes with guns. Right now in Tennessee, and Beverly knows this, right now in Tennessee, someone can drive through a neighborhood in Memphis and fire guns at houses, or someone can drive down the interstate and fire a gun at cars, be charged, be convicted of aggravated assault, and get probation, not spend a day of incarceration. And there's legislation this year sponsored by Senator Taylor, of course, and Representative Gillespie to try to close that loophole. So part of it is trying to make sure that we're not loosening our laws even more to provide easier access, but also holding individuals accountable. And one more thing on that, in terms of loosening our laws, part of what we need to be thinking about this year, realizing that it's going to be a multi-year effort to kind of do some of the things we want to do, part of what we need to do this year is make sure that things don't get worse. There's some legislation pending this year that could make the situation absolutely worse. For example, there's legislation pending right now that would allow teachers to carry handguns to school, for teachers to be armed. I think that's a bad idea. But that legislation is they're probably going to try to move it in the next couple of weeks. So part of what we need to be focused on is trying to make sure that legislation that makes the situation even worse does not pass this year.
Let me go to Bev. And the cards are being passed around, the yellow cards by the Voices volunteers, and you'll pass them back out to the outside, I think, of the row to get them picked up. And If you wave your hand if you need a card and you have a question that you do. Okay.
Eric, one thing that I heard, and I don't know if this was from the police department, but this was what blew my mind. And I'm not really shocked by a whole lot of things. But I can tell you, when I learned that an 11-year-old child had been arrested 9 times and committed 20 offenses and got right back out on the street. 9 times, 20 offenses.
Yeah, let me stay with you, Bev. Actually, over your careers, you've made change. I mean, you've fought for change, you've seen change, you've fought against a lot. How, and some of the questions get at this, how, I guess specific to the legislature, there's not a ton that city and state, and y'all may disagree with me, and that's fine, city and county can do about the gun laws. But how do you make change? How do you keep fighting? How do you say the 7-year, the wine and grocery store, and haven't we just gone to hell since wine was sold in the grocery store? It's chaos on Sundays in this city. I can't even tell you. I don't know about the rest of the state, but it is out of control here. But I'm sorry. It's so heavy, and so I had to joke about something. How do you make change? That's for you.
Okay. For you. So I was so glad I attended the meeting with Safer Tennessee this morning because I learned so much. One of the ways that you make change is to identify where there are opportunities for people to win. How can they win? How can we win? Because we've identified common ground that we can have incremental wins in. And so for those, and then we have to also identify there are people who truly are the leaders of the pack, people who influence a whole lot of other people. So if it were me, I would talk to them first. And I would find out, what is it that we need to do? What can we agree on? We're going to disagree on a lot. But what are the things that we can agree on? So let's start with that as a foundation. And I find that if you can find some ground where you agree, and if you can truly understand, if you're open enough to understand, because sometimes you want to say they're all crazy, but you have to open your mind, and you have to be able to receive information from them. Allow them to inform your thinking about what the wins can be. And I'm going to give this to you because you guys did a great job of talking about the strategy. How can you be strategic about it? How can you gain the confidence of people? One of the things I learned is that so many of them care about being reelected. It's all about reelection. So if I pass this, I'm turning off my audience who's going to vote for me. And so I think being strategic, being thoughtful, and then taking what they say and using that as a carrot to then build a bigger strategy can really result in some wins, I think. You know better than I.
I don't know if that's true. You just made a wonderful summary of kind of what, our presentation was this morning, that we are trying to be a collaborative organization. There have been a number of organizations that have come for us that we're building upon the work that they have done to build, a foundation. There's some in the audience right now, so thank you for all your work on firearm safety. But, to Beverly's point, we're an organization that we have kind of come into a unique space where we have heard that there is, Republicans who want to do something on this. There's Democrats who want to do something, independents, hunters, veterans. We are here to kind of welcome in a broad swath of voices who are interested in seeing a change in our firearm laws today for various reasons. And a lot of it is, it's personal because it's impacting our kids, it's impacting our communities. And we've picked the 3 areas that we're focused on: expanding background checks, secure storage of firearms, and passing temporary transfer laws, because these are all things that have bipartisan support. They poll well both with Republican and Democratic voters, and they are things that, when we have conversations with legislators, we can share with them the data that shows this is evidence-based. It's worked in other conservative states. And we have, and we're looking at it as, again, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Actually, my boss, Senator Friss, told me that I resonated with me is a quote he said from Albert Einstein. And I was like, Albert Einstein. And he said, the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest. Not very sexy sounding, but what it suggests, though, is that, really, if we continue to make small, seemingly insignificant changes, we do this day in, day out, year after year, it actually builds up to something meaningful. And so you all being here is that first kind of meaningful step. We need you all to now hear what you're learning tonight, because I think a lot of you all are probably personally impacted. Have those conversations with your friends, your family, your colleagues at work. Tell them about Safer Tennessee, safertn.org, that you can join our coalition. We are looking for individuals who are willing to reach out to their legislators and let them know that this is something they're concerned about. You look at these, primary elections, you'll be shocked by how small of a margin these elected officials, they win by. It's a very low turnout, frankly. And so, we need you all to, not just be coming to these conversations, but also, expressing your opinion with your vote. And we have, as I think Katie mentioned, we have, other ways to kind of raise awareness with yard signs, buttons. Always we love, donation support, of course. But this is something that is, going to take time and going to take, frankly, also rural voices as well. There's this perception that this is just an urban issue, that this is it's Nashville, Memphis, Chattanooga, and that kind of, the story ends there. And that's really not the case. Suicide in particular really disproportionately impacts our rural communities. East Tennessee has a suicide rate that's actually twice that of the Memphis region. We are number 3 in the nation for accidental shootings by children. And a lot of that is occurring, unfortunately, in the rural parts of our state. So we need you to also not just have those conversations here in Shelby County where we know people are impacted. If you have family also or friends in other parts of the state, we need those rural members to also to be hearing from their legislators. Bill mentioned his good friend in East Tennessee who kind of sees things differently. Unfortunately, for a long time, really kind of strong Second Amendment voters, they're a very loud, but actually smaller group. They hear a lot of that, but they aren't hearing from us as much. I call it kind of like the silent majority, because we're seeing the majority of polls support us. So that's really kind of what I would say to folks to try and really get engaged here. And it's a collaborative effort. So, and I know, Bill may have more to add here because he's actually had.
Hang on, just one sec. And we had a lot of questions. This is great because you addressed a lot of questions that people had about what do I do? How do I reach out? Obviously, if you want to get involved, I'm trying to be as neutral as I can, but I'm not doing a very good job tonight. There are a lot of voices folks here. There are other groups here, as she said. But on a very, very practical level, when we say reach out to legislators, is that a phone call? Is that a letter? Is that an email? Is that going to the legislature and trying to get a meeting? I mean, what is it on a very practical level that speaks to and potentially has impact on a legislator?
Sure. And I know it's intimidating, right? Because a lot of people, you haven't done that outreach before, or you may not even necessarily know who your legislator is yet. So it's very easy to look up first if you aren't sure. You can just Google the Tennessee General Assembly website. You can go to capital.tn.gov. You can also go to the Safer TN website. We've got a guide on how to find your legislator there. And when you look up your member by your address, you can see right there, they give you their email, they give you their phone number. You can easily, do whichever you're comfortable with. Highly recommend including your address so that they know you're a constituent. Giving any pertinent information that would make them, like I'm a regular, primary voter, I'm a Republican in your district, or, if they're a Democrat, I'm a Democrat in your district. Whatever it is, I lead a local business here. something that gives context to what you're saying, and then just share why you're concerned about these issues. It doesn't have to be, a profound, data-filled letter. Just hearing your voice, and frankly, we had a lot of moms who become really engaged on this. We also need to hear from more men, frankly. Our legislature is predominantly white men. We really need them to hear more from folks who look like, them, frankly. We also have postcards in the back with the Save for Tennessee logo on it that Claudia is holding up, that you can easily also send to your legislator as well if you want to make it easy thing to let them know that you're supporting our policy priorities here at Save for TN. So, and if you are interested in meeting with your legislator, we also have a legislative crisis team. You can email info@savefortn.org, and we'd be happy to get you connected with your member.
Let's go to Bill. We'll go to Bill real quick. Related. Oh, great. What did I just do? Sorry, I got my question. What do you think can be done outside the legislature? We're very focused on the legislature. They're in session. I mean, to a degree that people, I think, don't fully understand. I didn't fully understand probably a few years ago the degree to which public safety laws, guns, not guns, are set at the state, and the hands of local officials are kind of bound by that. But beyond the legislature, what can be done?
Well, a lot can be done at the local level. I could give a lot of examples, but for example, in Memphis, we are 500 police officers short of what we need. And as a result of that, the police department is very stretched. It's very, very difficult for them to saturate crime hotspot areas. It is very difficult for them to adequately staff investigative bureaus to solve crimes. So that's a total local government issue, not involving state government. So that's an example of something we can do. Another example is locally to really target those bad actors who are responsible directly or indirectly because of their influence over others for a large percentage of our violent gun crime. And we pretty much know who they are. A lot of them are on probation or parole already. Others are known by the police department. And to Mayor Strickland's credit, he began an effort to really target and focus on those individuals. I think Mayor Young is going to continue that effort to really target those individuals. But if we can really maintain that, scale it up, sustain it over time, that can have a very, very significant impact. So those are examples of things that we could do at the local level. I could give probably 4 or 5 other examples, but those are examples that really we can handle at the local level.
Let me we're out of, one of these was not a question, it was wrap in 10 minutes. And I was like, there's no, I used to be in charge, no, but that's totally fine, I'm just joking. Let's give it to Bev maybe for the last question, and people will be around if you've got other questions as we, when we finish this formal part of this. Again, outside the legislature, outside government, what can people do? I'm putting you on the spot with this.
Yeah, no, that's good though. One of the things that I've often thought, and maybe we can't do this at the local level, but I know at one point, city government or Shelby County, they were talking about actually passing legislation that dealt with gun control. I think though, and you have to help me, if it is not sanctioned by the state, can the city or county pass anything?
Not much.
Not much. Well, tell me, what can we pass?
I'm trying to think of an example of something we can pass. One example that one of these rural legislators, by the way, in terms of how to impact legislators, I'm all in favor of emails and phone calls and letters, but the most powerful impact is for you to be able to have a one-on-one civil meeting with that legislator. That is the best way. But I was having a conversation with a rural legislator just a couple of months ago about this whole issue of whether someone should be required to at least secure a handgun in a vehicle if they are insistent on having that handgun in a vehicle. And he said that he felt there was nothing to prevent a city such as Memphis, by ordinance, of imposing a fine for that. So if you're not securing your handgun, you can be fined. Now, I understand that there is legislation that has been introduced this year in the legislature to prohibit local government from doing that. So that's you know, that kind of idea gets out, and then there's a legislator who's going to introduce a bill to prohibit that. So, but you know, frankly, and I've had a lot of people ask me, well, why don't we just have a local handgun carry permit system? And in fact, I believe the city council is either planning to put a referendum on the ballot to do that. It's not going to be legal because it's in violation of state law. So it's kind of going through the motion, really.
I'll say last thing. I'm going to assume I have a minute left here. The other thing, I mean, obviously, there is a wide spectrum of organizations and people and views on public safety and guns. This represents a fairly wide part of it, but not the whole of it. And there are, I think, I mean, I've had the chance to interview so many of the people who do amazing work at the street-by-street neighborhood level. They work with local schools. They work with Blight. They work, you know, there's a group, I don't know if Natalie McKean is here. She's maybe going to be here, but like Whole Child Strategies. Just look them up. They focus on a neighborhood and they try to provide what I will lamely call wraparound services to at-risk kids. Because I think one part of the conversation, and a few people who saw that I was moderating this were like, you know, but what about those things that happen before someone has a gun, right? What about what leads that person to the gun? And those are things that, to the people who ask, so many of them, what can I do to get involved? It can be this, it can be all kinds of things, but those interventions early, I think, is something that there is an amazing number of groups, and I just know Memphis doing really incredible stuff there. So we're going to wrap up. Did you go through all your points of how to get involved? I think we did that. First of all, thank you all for being here. Thank you to Voices for Safer Tennessee, the folks who came in from Nashville and those from Memphis. And most of all, thank you to the panel.
Thank you again, friends. We're so glad and grateful that you came out tonight. Let me send you into the world with a blessing. Go forth into the world in peace. Be of good courage. Hold fast to that which is good. Render to no one evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the afflicted. Honor all that the Lord sets before you. Love and serve God, rejoicing in the power of the Holy Spirit and the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with you now and remain with you always. Amen.